Well, good morning, all of you folks, all of my friends out there in YouTube land. I hope you're having a good day. So here we are again, in the studio, myself and my lovely assistant. We're going to record another video, and the theme for today is grace, God's grace. But first, let me do my little commercial plug. The book that I've been talking about now for quite a while is in print as of June. This is August. Reason and Beyond. I'm going to hold it up and you can see it. Quite a nice cover. It's available on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and a number of other websites. Kind of scattered all over the web. It's also available in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, the English-speaking world in general. So those of you that might be interested, you can check it out. All right, the theme today is grace. So I'm going to start out. Let's see if I can carry it off. Trying to sing a verse or two of a nice, beautiful old hymn that I think expresses the concept well. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a soul like me. For I once was lost, but now I am found. I was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my soul to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. I think many of you will probably recognize that. I do kind of a bluesy version of it, but I think many of you will recognize that song, hopefully. And it's a beautiful old song, lyrics written in the 19th century, and the melody is an old melody. But there are three things that are said in those first two verses. There are three mentions of grace, and I think that's a good place to start. Now, first of all, it talks about how grace saved me. Okay. Now this, of course, is central to, I think, all the Judeo-Christian religions. But even the spiritual traditions, grace as well is recognized. And we're talking God's grace, the grace of the Creator, a gift of the Creator, what we are given. Okay. And interestingly enough, there are aspects, let's say, of spiritual reality, of our true nature that can be described a bit and talked about. Even though, again, ultimately, spiritual reality cannot be captured by words. But grace is something a bit different. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to really define grace. I'm not going to try. But it is, let's say, it's a gift of God. Obviously, it comes from love, and grace is given us. It is a help given us, not because we've earned it or deserved it, even though as God's children, obviously everything that we get, we are worthy of. But grace is something that is simply given to us, that is offered to all of us. In fact, again, on the spiritual path, I think many of the spiritual paths, whether they're the traditional ones, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Sufism, the traditional mystical traditions, spiritual traditions, but even Course in Miracles, you guys, if you've heard other videos, you've heard me mention it, profound spiritual teaching, talks about grace. But generally speaking, there is an agreement on the spiritual path. Now, the path, of course, is our journey back to remembering, to reaching again the truth of what we are. which in this world of separation has been forgotten and covered over. All right? And generally speaking, in the spiritual paths, this is what I would say, and this has been my experience as well, in my journey of transformation. Like grace is one of two elements that are functioning. All right? Now grace, as was pointed out recently, something I read by an Indian saint that I'm very fond of, she pointed out that it is always raining grace, both without and within. Now, another way to say that, it's God's grace is always being given us. It's always available. Okay? It is never not being sent or given to us by our Creator. But the key here is that our mind must be receptive and open and clear enough of all the obstructive factors in order to receive it, in order to be aware of the help we're giving. Yeah, let me say this. You could say grace is also, it's a kind of a power. It's not so much like an energy as the light is and the Shakti, both of which are considered divine energies, but it is a power. And generally, we become aware of the workings of grace in our lives through its effect on the conditions and the circumstances of our lives. And I suspect probably many of you have had the experience when there's been a problem or a situation in which things weren't looking well. There's been a lot of pressure coming from somewhere. Suddenly, kind of a help comes in from somewhere. It can come from any direction, from anybody, and in different ways. But this help will come, and it will solve our problem. It will ease our suffering, our pain, if that is part of the problem. And it just happens that our problem is solved. Okay, our situation is healed. And you could say, and I will say, that what we are seeing then is the workings of grace. So grace, even though we can't define it or grasp it, that power is always available to us. It is working in our lives. And I think many people on the spiritual path and many religious people as well have had experiences when it's just like something comes in. It's that grace, that divine power, and delivers us from a situation or a problem. I've had many experiences like that, many instances. I'm sure many people have. And of course, it's way beyond the probability, let's say the idea that it's just chance or coincidence. There are no coincidences in God's plan. There are no coincidences in life. And I think there are many of us living a spiritual life or an authentically religious life who have had enough experiences of that we know it's real. Grace is very real. And I guess one of my points here is that we know it's available, we know it's operating in our lives by its effect on the conditions and circumstances of our lives. I've had a few instances of just miraculous kind of help through the operation of grace. Well, I'm going to share with you a story about a situation I was in, a pretty tight situation many years ago. I just got the okay from my spiritual guidance. I've been traveling in Africa. I lived overseas for a number of years when I was young, and I decided I wanted to go to Africa, and I saved up some money. I was living in Europe, and so I took a boat. Tunisia, and I hitchhiked to North Africa and down through the Sahara Desert into West Africa. And at one point, I was about to cross the border from Nigeria into another small nation in West Africa called Benin in French. Benin And it seemed like just a natural, easy thing to do. I mean, I didn't have a lot of money. I was hitchhiking. So I just came walking up to the border, my bag on my shoulder. And the Nigerian customs stamped me out, okay? Which means they stamped my passport, they stamped my visa as invalid, okay? And you can't get into Nigeria by getting a visa at the border. You have to get it in another country. So I was stamped out by Nigeria. I come walking up to the customs booth, to the police in the gate in Benin, and they spoke only French. That was a French colony. I had learned a little bit of French. And they had never seen a European, American, say a non-African, a white man, on foot before, just walking up to their border. So they were immediately, for some reason, suspicious. And I could feel their tension. And they asked me where I was going. And I told them after Benin I was going on to Togo, which was their neighboring nation on the other side. Well, unbeknownst to me, it's a bit long story, but I'll get to the point. They had fought a border war with Togo a couple of years before. So then immediately the policeman thought I might be spying for Togo. Okay? So he said, "Ne pas bon, this isn't good," and he would not let me in to the country. Okay, that's fair enough. But Nigeria would not let me back into Nigeria because now I did not have a valid visa. So I'm standing there between the two, in no man's land, and I'm stuck. And what am I going to do? The police will not let me in. They're really feeling threatened, just I guess by my presence there. So I'm standing there wondering what to do, and up comes driving a car. Has a lovely guy and an Austrian man who works for the Rockefeller Foundation in Nigeria, his wife and his son, and he's going to Cotonou, across into Benin, to give the commencement speech at the University of Cotonou to the graduates, right? So he has an appropriate visa and he's in a car and there's no problem. So he comes walking up, he sees there's a problem, and he says, "Well, what's going on here?" And the policeman explains it to him. He speaks good French. And he says, "Well, I tell you what, I'll take responsibility for him. I'll take him with me, and I'll make sure we'll take him all the way through to the border with Togo and make sure he leaves the country by tonight." So just like that, my problem was solved. Otherwise, I might still be there waiting. Police forces they're pretty suspicious, and they don't change their mind. So the policeman told me, "Fine, but if you're still in Benin tonight, I will arrest you." So I said, "Okay." So I was saved, in effect. Just a perfect coincidence. I didn't even have to wait more than 30 seconds, and the solution came driving up. Now I call that grace. But I had several happenings like that when I was in Africa. In fact, it was when I was traveling in Africa, after being sort of borderline spiritual life, but having enough experiences and a belief, recognition of God's presence. My experiences in Africa, a couple of months, and it's very, very difficult to hitchhike through Africa. And it's a very tough place to travel. This was about 45 years ago. But my experiences then, I was saved more than once. And after I left Africa and went back to Europe, I finally realized it. I felt like I hadn't traveled to Africa. The Holy Spirit had literally, or Jesus, had literally carried me on his back through Africa. I mean, there were several different places where I could have been in really hot water. And I didn't have much money. I didn't have enough money to get back. Actually, that's another story. Yeah, how I managed to get out of Africa. But that's another story of grace, but I'm not going to go into that one. But I thought that was a good example. There was a movie recently where Tom Hanks was stuck in the airport where the American customs wouldn't let him in, and he couldn't go back to Europe, something like that. Similar kind of idea. And I don't know how the grace worked out for him in the movie, but I know how it worked out for me. And it was just perfect. I didn't even have to wait. I could say it was maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. I'm standing there wondering what to do. So God's grace is always available to us. Evidently, I certainly wasn't that open to it at that time. Was just starting to, It was starting to open my mind and be mindful. It was turning in that direction, was doing my best, but you certainly couldn't say at that time I was any kind of serious spiritual practitioner or somebody who was really working. But our Creator, God, is very merciful. If there's the least little kind of opening in the mind, often that grace will be given, that help will be given. This is something real important to recognize. There's a tendency in the world, I think, by some of us, maybe by all of us at certain times, to want to blame God for not helping us or not being there when we need it. But the fact of the matter is, the help we need will be given. And sometimes in difficult situations, we are meant to deal with it. We are meant to take a look at our suffering, take a look at what's happening, take responsibility for it, and make choices in our mind, to get us through. But God's grace is always with us. And some of you may have had this experience as well. There have been times, my experience has been, I've literally felt like a holiness and grace just raining down, like rain, like the Indian saint said. So it is always there, and it's a matter of us being available. Now, taking it back, let's say, to the spiritual path, to the spiritual journey. The purpose of our journey, once we step onto that path, is we want to go back to the source. We want to go back and rediscover and return to. And we don't have to find it, we just have to return to the truth of what we are, the spiritual reality within, which is called the self, with a capital S, or the Christ, the Spirit, Buddha nature, the unborn. There's a lot of different terms. And of course, when we do that, we are going back to God, because we live in God, we have our being in God, and we move in God, and God has created us. We are like an extension, a creation of the divine, and we have never left. So that is the purpose of the spiritual journey. And of course, our Creator wants us back because we are part of Him. So that grace is given. Everything we need is given. All right. So that's coming from God's side. Now, from our side, our job is to discover the obstacles, the impediments, the unwillingness, and all the habits, tendencies, mental patterns, our fear and our anger, and judgments, and hatred, and all kinds of things that we carry in our mind, in our body, in our subtle bodies. Remember, the mind is very deep. It has layers, subconscious layers. Okay? So our job is to, and of course the Miracles points this out in a very beautiful way when it talks about love. It says, teach only love, for love is what you are. Again, as part of God, and God is love. Love is a part of what we are. Now the Course says you do not have to search for love. Right? There's that song, searching for love in all the wrong places. As humans, we tend to search for love, try to find it in another person, in conditions and circumstances. But love as love, right, is unconditioned and uncompromised. It's a part of what we are. It lies there deep within us, waiting to be rediscovered. So the Course in Miracles also said, your task then, as I mentioned, is not to search for love outside yourself. Your task is to become aware of all the obstacles within you to love's presence. Okay? As we become aware of those obstacles, as we become aware of them, and we do the work we need to do. Now, it takes mindfulness, it does take courage, consistency. There are things like meditation and prayer. All of these practices help. In fact, I would say they're essential. And over time, we begin to become aware of the obstacles within us. We begin to be willing to let go. And ultimately, all the obstacles come down to one form or another, or one consequence or another of fear. And so we slowly undo this package. I call it a configuration of mind and of energy. As we undo that, we make more room, both for the love within us, as well as just the spiritual truth, the consciousness within us, the light within us, to shine out become part of our experience and transform our consciousness. And we become more available to grace, to God's help. So it'll often seem like in the beginning that a lot of effort is necessary. I mean, effort is really necessary. You could say, I'm fond of describing the spiritual path in terms of factors that need to be balanced. And so you could say our journey back to God involves both our effort, okay, our willingness, our perseverance, our dedication. All of that comes together in our practice, right? Our effort, both in mind, in heart, in emotions, and in actions and in words. And the journey back requires our effort, and it does require God's grace, the help. And it's interesting because the farther we go into the path, the deeper we go into our mind, and the healing of our mind and heart progresses, the more available God's grace is. And I would say that's been my experience. It's been the experience of many of my friends, all people that are seriously committed. I call them spiritual practitioners. But the farther we go into it, and the more we heal, the more help we get, and the more things just work out for us. Again, that is the operation of grace. So one could say, as I said earlier, I'll just repeat it, that the journey back is a combination of grace and our effort. And ultimately, we are even our effort is helped. I know in the East, I think the spiritual traditions I've heard, it's been said by a number of saints in the Indian tradition, India. I've read widely in those areas and actually have met a few saints. They tend to say that everything is God's grace. Even our effort is grace. Okay, even that's given to us. But we still must make that effort. And finally, at some point, when you reach a certain point in your journey where enough healing has taken place, and the mind is expanded, the heart is open, and love is flowing, you actually realize no real effort is necessary. Okay. Then what's necessary is a sort of a constant attention, constantly being present. Now you could call that an effort, but that's not effort as we normally understand it. Because once you begin to feel that reality within you, and you begin to feel that communion, that presence, at that point, it really becomes what we call, the Course in Miracles talks about the whole process is not a doing, the process of awakening, it's an undoing. And at a certain point of the undoing, you begin to recognize that, effort in the sense of what we humans think of as effort, and choice in the sense of what we humans think of as choice, is no longer necessary. Now that doesn't mean you just stop and do nothing, because your mind is very active. It's still moving, it's chattering, and there are still choices needed in this world. But you become aware that there is really only one choice always to be made. That's between truth and illusion. And when you really become conscious of that, you recognize, and for you become capable of that, it's not really a choice anymore. It's a matter of remembering, of being present and being conscious. Okay, well I think that this may be a good place to stop. Can we spend just about 30 seconds or a minute just joining together in the light and the love, and let's call it the grace of God, just kind of a little meditative sense. So if you would like to, just close your eyes gently, and we're just going to join together for about a minute. bless you.